Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out Nuclear Revenge. Story 1. Bully tries to act like it was in school. Guess I will tell on you then. In secondary school I was tormented by a specific bully. For years I was beaten up and publicly humiliated on a daily basis. The worst thing he did was beat me up so bad that I got a concussion and broken ribs when I was 14. He never faced consequences in school because his family was rich and he was pretty popular. For context, I live in a pretty small town in England, so everyone knows everyone, including the bully. He left the school when I was 17 and I didn't see him for about a year. Around this time I got way more popular and started going to parties and making more friends, and annoyingly he was friends with some of my friends and his GF was at my school, but I managed to avoid him mostly until I finished school. Unfortunately, I saw him a few months later. My friends went to the pub to celebrate our exam results, and he was a complete asshole to me, started insulting me and mocking me to my friends, saying, "Why do you hang out with me?" bringing up a bunch of stuff from years ago, and at one point put me in a headlock and told me that my friends only hung out with me out of pity. I wasn't going to take it, but I also wasn't going to get into a punch-up because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of getting me angry. And right at that moment I overheard the perfect thing. He was bragging to his friends about the house party he was having and saying about all the drugs he was going to take to the party, and said he had it all in his car. It wasn't just a bit of weed either. If I remember correctly, he said he had 13 bags of coke, about 30 pills of MDMA and 7 or 8 grams of ketamine, and then I knew what I would do for my revenge on the guy. As he was leaving I followed him to his car and took a photo of his number plate. Then after he was driving off I walked off and called the police. I knew they needed something more than hearsay to stop the car, especially because I didn't want to be traced back to it, so I told the police I saw my bully snorting a white powder in the pub toilets. This was a complete fabrication, and then get into the driver's side of the car. I then provided them with the license plate of the car and told them the direction they were heading in. I honestly didn't think they were going to stop him, or maybe they would ask him questions later and ruin his party, but the driving on drugs allegation plus the fact he had been arrested for minor possession before, which I didn't know at the time, was enough for the police to take it seriously, and stop and search his car, which they found all the drugs he was transporting to his party, and he got arrested for it. The consequences of his arrest meant he lost out on his university place. His rich parents had enough of his behavior, so kicked him out and cut him off from their funds. And a rumor I heard was that in turn for a lower sentence my bully ratted out his supplier, which resulted in him getting stabbed multiple times, and as a consequence of that now has to wear a colostomy bag, and that plus his criminal record means he is currently unemployed. TLDR, I called the police on my former bully, which started a domino effect that resulted in him losing his opportunity to go to university, a criminal record, getting stabbed, and now the shitbag has to have a literal bag of shit strapped to him. Story 2. Interested in being a mod? Once again, we are in need of a new mod or two. Mainly to help us out when we aren't available. Mod availability is the only factor that will bring back manual post reviewing if we do decide to reinstate it. So if this is what the community is wanting, then be prepared to read a lot. There are a few requirements that you have to meet. 1 must be 18 plus. Things can go wrong and we don't need a minor being harassed by the anti-mod users of Reddit. But also, it's nice to have some who is used to hard work. 2 must be available at least a few times a week. This is a pretty low standard, considering the other mod and I are doing full-time schooling/work and are still active almost daily. You must also communicate your schedule with us so there is not any confusion. 3 must be willing to handle daunting tasks. If I'm being honest, this responsibility is rather boring and even disheartening for having to be a glorified, internet garbage man that cleans up the behavior and trashy posts for years. The best part, it's all for free. 4 must interact with users in a nice, human manner. Here at NR, we don't act overly professional or bot-like. We just interact normally but with a bit of a higher standard. 5 must pass our moderator's training process. This is an intricate training/selection process to help us decide if you would make a good mod. Even if you are an experienced mod, you still have to complete this. Our sub is not like the others. It's very unique and requires special moderating. Just so you are aware, we will take a day or two to gather our candidates to start with. If you are chosen, then you will be asked a few questions. If this goes well, then you will be invited to the training/selection process. Your availability determines how long this process takes. Your performance determines your outcome. Even if you aren't selected or interested, thank you for your participation and willingness to help out. Story 3. They screwed me out of my pay. I screwed them out of their company. Many years ago I got a job with a marketing company during phone deregulation. It was the Wild West and a lot of small long-distance companies sprang up, all trying to get a piece of the pie. Eventually they all got bought up by the bigger fish, but at the time they were all paying hired gun marketing firms very well to score contracts for them to lock people in. I got a job with one of those marketing firms, a new age capitalism company that insisted we all do yoga and breathing exercises while they rang a little bell and gave us affirmations about how many contracts we were all going to sell and how much money we'd all make. The job was 100% commission, but I was always good at sales, so I looked at the pay scale and noticed that it was exponential, presumably to entice people to work hard with impossible payouts. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, with the payout based on your weekly sales numbers. I decided I would give it a shot for 1 week to see how much I could realistically make before deciding whether I was willing to put up with the tasteless vegan snacks and mandatory voluntary yoga regime. For the next week, I pushed myself as hard as I could. For 7 straight days, I worked 14-plus-hour days every single day and used every trick and technique I had learned doing sales to score as many contracts as I possibly could. I figured this would tell me my maximum possible income and could decide on that basis whether to stay. At the end of the week, I had blown everyone else out of the water. In fact, I had not just gotten more contracts than anyone there had ever seen in a week, I had gotten more than any of them had seen in a month. Because of the exponential scale, I realized that I was making absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, $10K and a week. They had never expected anyone could actually hit those kinds of numbers. Coming in the next week, expecting a huge payday, I ended up with about 5% of what I expected. They told me there were problems with a lot of my contracts, and that I would be allowed to fix them and submit them a few at a time over the next several weeks. These problems were things like an apostrophe wasn't quite clear or the dash in someone's phone number was slightly crooked. They were going to screw me. That night I got a phone call from the company's office manager, Frank, who wanted to meet up for a drink. Curious, I agreed. Over beers, Frank told me that the owners of the company were in a panic because I would have bankrupted them. He said they spread out all my contracts on the floor of the office, then they crawled over them, inspecting each one and trying to figure out if I was committing some kind of fraud. When they comprehended that all my contracts were legit, they decided they had no choice but to screw me over. Frank told me he realized at that point that if they would screw me, they'd screw him too, and, besides, he was tired of doing yoga. He asked me if I would be interested in going into business with him and go head-to-head with his bosses. I thought it sounded intriguing, but I asked him how he thought we could compete. Frank explained that he had found out they didn't actually have the contract for our city. They were acting as independent contractors for another company who had the contract to market the service in an entirely different city. They were poaching here, because the person who did have the contract wasn't actively using it. We put together a pitch and approached the guy with the real contract, Joe, and told him about the people poaching his turf. We agreed that we'd split with him, we'd take the upfront money for each contract, and he'd get the back-end money down the road. It was a good deal for everyone, so Joe contacted the phone company and had them threaten the poachers with a big lawsuit if they didn't stop. A week later Frank and I strolled into the offices of our old employer. Most of the furniture, and all the yoga mats, was gone, and there was just a table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a file box with the final pay envelopes for everyone. I made a show of counting my money to make sure it was all there, and the two owners, husband and wife, Told Frank and I bitterly that they'd had to take cash advances on their credit cards for this money, and asked me if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled and said, "Nope," and left. Our marketing company made us a lot of money over the year until the company got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. Story 4. Haribo revenge goes way farther than intended. Dr. Guy bullies the shit out of Kid, Kid feeds him Haribo sugar-free bears, and Kid is violently intolerant of sugar substitutes, shits blood and busts blood vessels in eye, goes blind in that eye. I was a witness to this, a long time ago, and the results were learned of by word of mouth. Once upon a time, there was a kid. Let's call him Marco. Marco was your everyday kid, a little skinny. I remember him being slightly geeky. If you left your pens unattended, he'd disassemble them before you turned back around in your seat at times. He was nice, polite, and fairly helpful. This was middle school. One day, though, he does it to a bully. Let's call him Polo. Polo is huge, but with fat. He looks like if you drilled 3 holes into him, a giant could use him for bowling. He's not nice. He's not handsome. He's got a posse of equally disgusting friends who all gang up together to bully others. I suspect that if they hadn't ganged up with each other, they would have been bullied. Perhaps they had been in the past, and got a taste of power over others when they ganged up. I don't know, I kept to myself. One day, I see Marco with a swollen eye and wet hair. He's limping a bit too, and his backpack is ripped. I ask him what the hell happened. Turns out Polo threw him into a bathroom stall by his backpack, which ripped. The toilet got him in the knee, and Polo shoved his face into the water, bashing his eye into the seat. I ask why Polo had done this to him and he says I took his pen apart. It was just a big crystal or some cheap pen like that. Things escalate over the next few weeks. Eventually, Marco has to take time off when Polo strips him naked in the bathroom except for his boxers and makes him shove them into the toilets. The school, being full of your typical assholes, tries to expel Marco for damage to school property, and does nothing to Polo. This is stopped by video evidence of the gang leaving the bathroom, laughing and rifling through Marco's backpack, then tossing it in the trash. When Marco comes back, he's different. He's not happy. He's quiet, subdued. He doesn't talk to anyone, and bruises magically appear on him between classes. He withdraws into himself and begins to look positively skeletal. Of course, no one at the school does anything, except the one nice jock. He comes across Polo stealing Marco's backpack and folds Polo into a trash can. Of course, he's suspended, but does it again when he comes back. The teachers give up on suspending the jock after his parents threaten to sue. The fact that someone bothered to stand up for him, though, seems to have given life back to Marco. He starts opening back up and putting weight back on, which is very good. One day, though, he's wearing a scarf. A very special, beautiful knitted scarf. His grandfather had knitted for him, yes, grandfather, before he died. Polo steals it and comes back the next day with a bag of ashes, handing it to Marco. He laughs hysterically. Marco comes back the next day with a backpack full of sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. Polo, being the glutton that he is, steals every single bag of bears and eats them by the fistful throughout the day. Marco cries, but I remember something in his sobs didn't quite reach his eyes. Near the end of the school day, Polo lurches out of the classroom and bolts for the bathroom. He doesn't come back the next day. Or the next. Someone says they saw blood in the bathroom. Polo comes back a few days later with an eye patch and mottled, fading bruising all across his face. I believe it's called petechiae eye. He's permanently blind in his left eye and the bruising makes him look like a ripening fruit for as long as it lasts. He's in and out of school for doctor's appointments for a while. He didn't mess with Marco again and instead became very introverted and quiet. The reports of blood in the toilet of the bathroom he went to were never confirmed, but it's quite likely. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.